No, no. Okay, so next topic would be tax on employed taxpayer. Okay, so this time the taxpayer is purely earning compensation income. So there are no other income earned by the taxpayer but by mere true employment. So compensation income would be all remunerations for services performed by an employee for his employer under the employee-employer relationship. So examples of compensation income would be salaries and wages. Then we have your emoluments and honoraria. So these are given to those services or performance of an employee other than the regular responsibilities. So that would be their emoluments and honoraria. Then allowances. So that would form part your rise allowance, travel allowance, representation allowance, and any other allowances provided by the employer to his employees. Okay? Then next we have your commission. Some companies is a commission based. So the income given by the employer to his employee is based on a quota or a percent of the employee's actual performance. That is commission. Then we have your fees and your fringe benefits. Okay? So fringe benefit has a separate discussion. So we will discuss that in a separate video next week, I think. Okay. So minimum wage earner. How about those employees earning uh, within the statutory minimum wage? So, worker in the private sector who is paid with the statutory minimum rate or to an employee in a public sector with compensation income of not more than the statutory minimum rate in the agricultural sector where the worker employee is assigned. So statutory minimum wage is exempted from income tax, including holiday pay, its night shift differential pay, and hazard pay. So these income earned by the statutory minimum wage earner will be subject sa income tax. So they will not subject for or they will not going to pay income tax, but their employer will declare those employee classified under this kind of taxpayer. So ginadeklara na siya ni employer sa Bureau of Internal Revenue. Okay. So employee may be subject to the following. So if an employee, so those taxpayer who are employed and there is no other sources that comes to him or her instead of his or her salary. Okay, from his or her employer. So that employee may be subjected to graduated income tax or what we call normal tax on the employee's compensation income, and he may also subject to capital gains tax for onerous transfer of capital asset in case there are other sources of income which is subject to final tax, so the employee will still subject to pay because this transaction is an individual transaction separate from the regular from other income which is subject to regular tax. Third, final tax on certain passive income. So if an employee has bank deposits, has interest income sa mga deposits siya sa iyang bank in savings account, and that is also subject to an interest income or considered a passive income, and which is also subject to a separate final tax on passive income. So our employee may be or subject to these three income taxes. So the pro forma computation for tax compensation income earner is the following. Of course, the taxpayer is purely earning a compensation income. So in short, only one income lang in our computation, and that would be compensation income. Otherwise, if the employee is earning other than or earning business or professional income, this discussion is not applicable to that taxpayer because that taxpayer will be classified as a mixed income earner, and that would be discussed later on this chapter. So, of course, we have to identify your compensation income, or the term would be taxable compensation income. Then, the deduction allowed by law are those mandatory deduction. So, these are deductions provided by the law. So, which are SSS if the employer is under private employer, and GSIS for those employee employed in a government service. And we have your PhilHealth, pag-ibig, contribution, and any other union dues and any other deductions na provided by law, which is allowed to be deducted from your gross income in order to arrive at our taxable income. And this taxable income, same is true with our taxpayer which are considered as self-employed and professional taxpayer. The same taxable income will be subject to income tax due using the graduated income tax rate. So we have already discussed that in our previous discussions, previous videos, how to compute the income tax due under graduated income tax rate. So just apply the knowledge we have already learned in our previous discussions. So illustration. Granger is an employee with rate above the minimum wage earner. So Granger is earning more than the statutory minimum wage. So he had the following data on his compensation income as an employee of Motivated Manpower Services Incorporated. So the information provided is taxable compensation income 280,000. Then another information is Granger also receives 13th month pay and other benefits which are exempted from income tax. That's 105. So the problem is very specific. It is exempted from income tax. So the amount is 105,000. Then the SSS and other mandatory contribution of Granger is 5,000. So obviously guys, this computation will be done by the employer of Mr. Granger. So it will be computed, filed, and paid by Motivated Manpower Services. But for illustration purposes, we are going to discuss how to compute the income tax due of Mr. Granger as an employee. So first, we have to identify the compensation income, that is 280,000, less the mandatory contributions which are SSS, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, and any other contributions allowed by law to be deducted from the compensation income. So in our problem, that would be 5,000. So the taxable income would be taxable compensation income, to be more specific. The amount is 275,000. So the same application or the same process how to identify the income tax due using the graduated income tax table is to base the taxable income of the taxpayer on the income tax table provided by our law. So to simplify, we are on the first bracket. So Granger falls on the first bracket of the income tax table, which is considered as 250 but not over 400,000. So we have already discussed and know that the first 250,000 was subject or was considered exempted by law. So the tax would be zero. So the tax of Mr. Granger would be the excess of 275 na taxable income less the exempted amount of 250. So the difference would be 25,000. Multiply it by the rate provided by law on our graduated income tax table, which is 20%. So the amount would be 5,000. Okay? So Mr. Granger is liable to pay or has a burden to pay the amount of 5,000 for his compensation income for the year wala nakabutang for the year provided under the illustration. Okay? So although The Motivated Manpower Services Incorporated is going to compute, file, and pay the amount of 5,000 together with the other co-employees of Mr. Granger. Okay? So we will learn that more on the next slides. Next, we have your monthly compliance of the employer. Okay, so we all know that a taxpayer employed or under the employee-employer relationship has the option of what we call ng substituted filing. So when we say substituted filing, it is the employer's responsibility to file, withheld, and pay the taxes of all of his employees sa kay Bureau of Internal Revenue. So the compliances of the employer would be BIR Form 1601C, or what we call the monthly remittance return of income taxes withheld on compensation. It is filed by the withholding agent who deducts the withholding tax on the compensation paid to employees. It means that in our previous illustration, the amount of 5,000, which is the burden of Mr. Granger to the state for his income tax, will be paid by motivated manpower services. So monthly na siya guys nga i-withheld. So the withholding will be discussed later in this chapter. We will learn that nga monthly na ang pagbuwin. So if we're going to simplify 5,000 of Mr. Granger divided by 12, so Mr. Granger has a withholding of more or less 400 pesos on his payslip. So sa payslip ni Mr. Granger, buwinan na siya guys ang ginatawag nga withholding tax on salary. So based on the illustration provided, that would be 400 every month. So that 400 together with the withholding tax of the co-employee of Mr. Granger, so Motivated Manpower Services Incorporated will pay or will remit, the proper term is will remit the withheld amount sa iyang mga employees sa Bureau of Internal Revenue. And that remittance or that form will be your 1601C, the monthly remittance return of income taxes withheld on compensation. So the amount of 400 withheld from Mr. Granger and other withholding taxes sang empleyado ni Motivated Manpower Incorporated will be consolidated, and every month it should be remit and paid by Motivated Manpower Services sa kay Bureau of Internal Revenue, and this would be the compliance of the employer. So guys, sitting pretty lang na mga employee, all they have to do is to perform their duties and responsibilities as an employee of Motivated Manpower Services, and their company is the one to file, pay, and remit their taxes to the Bureau of Internal Revenue. That is the principle of substituted filing. Okay, please take note. That is the principle of what we call substituted filing. So next, annual compliance of the employer. So we have your BIR Form 1604CF. So this return is filed by every employer or withholding agent or payer who is either an individual, estate, trust, partnership, corporation in case of Motivated Manpower Services in our illustration earlier, then government agency, and instrumentality, government-owned and controlled corporation, local government unit, and other juridical entity. So, in short, ang din-mention bago lang are our employers. So, those employers belong to a specific group mentioned earlier is the one required to deduct and withheld taxes on compensation paid to employees. So in layman's term, these employers will withheld a certain amount on the income na ginabayad or ginapasweldo nila in their employees every month. Then it will be reported for the entire year. Same with our previous discussion guys, that the computation of income tax is on an annual basis. So that is aligned also, that is also applicable for taxpayers in the labor sector or sa mga employees naton. So that is also applicable. So pero ang responsibilidad na da isang employer nila. Okay. So the return will be your 1604C. So the annual information return of income taxes withheld on compensation. Don't worry, this will be the burden or the responsibility of your employer if you will be employed if you will be employed as a regular employee after graduation, but if you were assigned as the one who going to file and prepare for this report, so it is a must to learn how to prepare and how to compute for the taxes of your co-employees if ever you will be the one assigned to do this job. Okay, next, income tax return of the employee. So guys, if you are an employee and there's no other sources income aside from being an employee, wala ka na sa ginatawag na business income or professional income, so your income tax return will be your BIR Form 2316 or the Certificate of Compensation Payment or Tax Withheld. This is the income tax return of employees under the principle of substituted filing. Okay? So BIR Form 2316 would be the Certificate of Compensation Payment, Tax Withheld, or Compensation Payment with or without tax withheld. So this is a certification to be accomplished and issued to each employee. So if the company, if motivated manpower services has 100 employees, so motivated Manpower Services Incorporated as in our example would prepare BIR Form 2316 100 man kabilog for each employee niya. Okay? Because this certificate or this return will be the proof that Mr. Granger were withheld and properly paid his taxes through a substituted filing. So, amuning proof ni Mr. Granger nga nakabayad siya. So, if ever Mr. Granger would apply for internet connection, water bills, kag nagapangayo, ang ina nga mga services ang ginatawag na ITR, so Mr. Granger would furnish his BIR 2316 para matagaan siya connection sa internet because some utility providers require ITR para ma-issue matakdan kanila sang connection. So amo ni ang i-apply mo or ihatag mo sa imong utility provider ang BIR form 2316 because for Mr. Granger this would be his income tax return. Okay? Pero hindi niya ging file sa BIR but it was issued by or accomplished by the employer. Okay? So again, a certificate to be accomplished and issued to each employee receiving salaries, wages, and other forms or remuneration by each employer, indicating therein the total amount paid, the taxes withheld, and therefrom during the calendar year. So this certificate, in turn, should be attached to the income tax return BIR Form 1700 for individual receiving purely compensation if there are mistakes in filing. So your BIR 2316 will no longer be your ITR kung may mga mistakes nga natabo. So ang correction niya na that would be BIR Form 1700. But if the tax is properly computed and withheld, so your BIR Form 2316 would be your income tax return for the employee, for that particular employee. Kung wala man ang problem, so BIR Form 2316 would serve as the income tax return of the employee. Okay? Or BIR Form 1701 for individuals with mixed income. Okay? So, for individuals who are employee, at the same time, businessman or businesswoman, or an employee sa isa ka opisina, and at the same time, he or she is practicing her profession, so BIR Form 2316 is not the income tax return of that employee or employee which is considered as mixed income earner. This will serve as a certification for withholding taxes. Okay? If the case would be for for individual mixed income earner. Next, your income tax return for or BIR forms. So BIR form 1700 or annual income tax return for individuals earning purely compensation income including non-business or non-professional related income. This return, your BIR form 1700 as mentioned earlier, this return shall be filed by every resident citizen deriving compensation income from all sources or resident alien and non-resident citizen with respect to compensation income from within the Philippines, except of the following. If the individual whose taxable income does not exceed 250, so hindi na kailangan mag-file BIR Form 1700 because in the first place, ang compensation income is not subject to tax. So whatever declared and remitted and filed by the employer sa sining employee is considered as final. Okay? Second, an individual with respect to pure compensation income as defined by Section 32A derived from sources within the Philippines and the income tax which has been correctly withheld, please take note, which has been correctly withheld. That was I'm trying to say on the previous slide. Tax due equals to tax withheld. So the tax due is equals to the tax withheld under the provision of 79 of the code, provided that an individual deriving compensation income concurrently from two or more employers at the same time during the taxable year shall file the income tax return. So in short, for those individual that there are mistakes in their tax due and withholding, they have to correct or they have to file the correct taxes using BIR Form 1700. In short, if the employee's tax due is not equal to the tax withheld, so the employee should file BIR Form 1700. Okay? Then another one, if the individual is deriving compensation income concurrently or at the same time from two or more employers. So sa aga, you are an employee of corporation A, then pagkagabi, you are a call center agent of a particular call center company or BPO company. So in short, duwang mo employers. So if you have two employers, so you have two BIR Form 2316. One is from Corporation A, ang imo nga night day job. Then sa pagkagabi nag-call center ka pagid, so you will receive another BIR Form 2316 from your BPO company, ang imo nga night job. So duwa ang imo 2316. So under the law, you have to file your BIR Form 1700. Okay? Concurrent from two more mere employers at the same time during the taxable year shall file and pay your income tax return BIR Form 1700. Then, an individual whose income has been subjected to final tax pursuant to this section of the tax code. So, what he refers by number 3, those individual which is filing and paying final tax on passive income and capital gains tax. These are exempted individuals. Then number 4, those individuals with a minimum earner as defined by section 22 of an individual. So those minimum wage earner ang ilang employer who were previously filed and paid their income tax return using the substituted filing is already enough for the Bureau of Internal Revenue for minimum wage earner. So hindi na kailangan nila mag-file sa BIR Form 1701. Okay, so let's discuss this one. Last, illustration. Akay is a computer programmer of a tech company in Manila. His rate is above the minimum rate provided by the law. He had the following data in the calendar year 2020. So gross compensation income net of mandatory deduction, that is 400,000. Then Akay also has a capital gain on a direct sale to buyers of shares of stocks not traded in the Philippine Stock Exchange. So he had gained 20,000. Then Akay also sold his real property in the Philippines and gained 900,000, but the selling price is 3 million. Then Akay has deposits in Land Bank of the Philippines and it earned 10,000. So what are the taxes, liabilities or burdens of Akay? So first, Akay is will be liable for normal income tax or what we call the graduated income tax. So using the graduated income tax table, we can identify or we can compute that 400,000 falls on the first bracket, that is for 250 not over for 400, and the tax would be 30,000. Try to review the computation. Okay? So it was I know that you are already uh, uh, ng experts on the application of graduated income tax table. The next, Akay will also liable for a capital gains on the shares on the selling of shares of stocks outside the Philippine Stock Exchange. That is 20,000, which is subject to a 15% passive final tax on passive income. So Akay also has a burden of 3,000 or a tax burden of 3,000 for the onerous transfer of share. Then Akay will also pay capital gains tax for his onerous transfer of real property of 3,000 of which is selling price of 3 million. That's 6% of the selling price since the assessor's value in BIR zonal value is not given. So it is 180,000. Then final tax on passive income in on his interest income from his savings deposit in Land Bank of the Philippines. So that's 20,000 times 20%. 10,000 times 20%. So the final tax on passive income on interest and deposit on Land Bank would be 2,000 pesos. So ng mga tax liability of Akay as a employee. Okay, so these are the liabilities of Akay as an employee.